Today we continue our series, A Journey of Hope. We began all the way back in February, and we're nearing the end. Easter is next Sunday. And throughout this journey, we've walked all the way through the Easter story, and we've stopped along the way to meet some unlikely characters and some unexpected events. Today we get to the last and really worst part of the story that we experienced prior to Easter Sunday. As I said earlier, it's Palm Sunday, and it should be one of those really, truly feel-good days in the church. I mean, think about it. Jesus enters Jerusalem. Massive party goes on. We have our kids wave palm branches and parade around the sanctuary. Truly a festive day is Palm Sunday. But as Mary said, the reality is people have limited memories, and praise is often short-lived. So we would be remiss on this Palm Sunday if we stopped there. If we just stopped at Jesus coming in and the palm branches waving, and then picked the story up again on Easter Sunday, peering into an empty tomb. If we made the quantum leap from waving palms to rolling away the stone, then Easter loses its power. We have to experience the cross for us to truly appreciate the empty tomb. Because Palm Sunday tells us that ultimately it's the cross that is the true tree of life for us. There's a guy named Robert Folger. He wrote a book he wrote several, but one of them was called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, I would highly suggest it. And here's a list of things that he says he learned in kindergarten that he thinks apply to everyday life. Share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. Put things back where you found them. Clean up your own mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. Flush. Warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. Live a balanced life. Learn some, think some, draw, paint, sing, dance, play, work every day. Take a nap every afternoon. When you go out into the world, watch for traffic, hold hands, and stick together. Think about that list. All we ever really needed to know about how to live, about what to do, and about how to be as people. We learned in kindergarten. I don't know about you, but I find that wisdom is often missing at the top of the grad school mountain. But it's almost always found in the sandbox of kindergarten. Because everything we need to know is in there somewhere. The golden rule and love and basic sanitation and ecology and politics and equality and sane living. And you take any of those and you extrapolate them out into a sophisticated adult understanding, you can apply them to your school, to your work, to your government, to the world. And they will hold true and clear and firm. Think about what better world we would have if everybody had milk and cookies at 3 o'clock every afternoon and then laid down with our blankies for a nap for a moment. Think about if governments actually had a policy that they would always put things back where they found them and that they would clean up their own mess. And it is still true no matter how old you are. The best policy when you go out into the world is to hold hands and stick together. Hold hands and stick together. That's what we need to do during Holy Week, is hold hands and stick together. Every Easter season, we are forced to consider questions like, why did Jesus have to suffer? Why did God send Jesus to die on the cross? Why do we suffer? Why do bad people sometimes live long lives while good people sometimes die young? The list just goes on and on and on. We struggle with those questions. And frankly, we struggle to find answers to those questions. But today we unapologetically face the suffering of the cross head on. We don't duck it. We don't try to avoid it, but we face it head on, knowing that in Jesus we can find true hope, even in the midst of our pain. Okay, so we talked about the Last Supper a few minutes ago. And after the Last Supper, if you remember, Jesus led the disciples out to the Garden of Gethsemane. And we talked about that scene just a couple of weeks ago. And while they're out there, Jesus is arrested. And that sets in motion a series of events that will take him all the way to the cross. And I want to read you a piece once he has been led to the cross. It's found in the Gospel of Mark, the 15th chapter. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the skull place, and they crucified him. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, the whole earth was dark. And at 3, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus let out a loud cry, and he died. And the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing Jesus saw how he died, he said, this man was certainly God's son. I mentioned all the things that are going to happen in the next service. 2 baptisms and 7 new members and 8 confirmands and communion. And I was talking to Sam, our son, older son, on the phone, and I was telling him that. He said, what are you going to do about preaching? And I said, I'm fairly certain I'm going to write a haiku for that service. If you don't know, haiku is Japanese poetry, 3 lines, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. So we laughed about that, but Joy and I actually wrote an Easter haiku. Here it is. Jesus, Son of Man, taught, healed, saved, died for our sins, Son of Man and God. He was born of a virgin. He was raised the son of an honest, hard-working carpenter. He didn't even start his public ministry until he was 30. And even then, he only did it in a public sense for 3 years. That's it. 3 years. He gathered some followers together. He taught a lot of people. He healed. He raised people from the dead. And he ticked off the wrong group of people. And he paid for that with his life. He was dragged through the streets like a common criminal. And he was hauled out to the place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. And there he was nailed to a cross between 2 criminals. And he was left to die the most painful death possible. And when it was time, and not one moment sooner than that, he willingly laid his life aside. It's important to know that. Nobody took it from him. He gave it up. And you think, why? Why would anybody do that? Especially Jesus, who could have stopped it at any moment. I'm going to be BJ, and I'm going to answer a question with a question. What would you do for your kids? What would you do for your grandkids? Would you lay down your life for your kids or your grandkids if it was absolutely necessary? My guess is the answer is yes. I certainly would. I would lay down my life for my kids in a heartbeat. I'd do it every day and twice on Sunday if I had to. So do we expect God to love us any less than we love our children and our grandchildren? Of course not. Why is that? Well, in the Message version of the Bible, it says it this way. This is how much God loved the world. He gave his Son, his one and only Son. And this is why. So that no one need to be destroyed. By believing in him, anyone can have a whole and lasting life. God didn't go to all the trouble of sending his Son merely to point an accusing finger, telling the world how bad it was. He came to help, to put the world right again. And anyone who trusts in him is acquitted. Anyone who refuses to trust him has long since been under the death sentence without knowing it. And why? because of that person's failure to believe in the one-of-a-kind Son of God when introduced to him. That's John 3:16 through 18. So I wonder this morning, what keeps you going in the midst of hardship and tragedy in your life? Would you have started this journey that Jesus went on this week? Would you have started it if you knew how it was going to end? If you knew the pain that was coming? Imagine how you would feel if somebody that was close to you betrayed you with a kiss. Imagine how you would feel if somebody that you trusted treated you like a criminal, especially when you did nothing to warrant such behavior. Imagine knowing the suffering that lay ahead. See, I can't help but think on Palm Sunday that Jesus' ultimate act of love on the cross proves that even in the midst of suffering, the worst suffering that we can imagine, God is with us. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross proves that there is always hope. And what oxygen is to lungs, hope is to life. And I find that when hope seems most elusive, that's when it's often right around the corner. We don't like Holy Week. It sounds great, Holy Week, but we don't like Holy Week. And really, who would? Who would like such a horror story with blood and torture and death? It is not the feel-good story that we want out of the Gospels. It's not the story we need at Easter. And yet we have to experience the Fright Night if we have any hope of truly appreciating Easter morning. If we don't walk the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering alongside Jesus Christ, if we don't help him carry his cross, if we don't force ourselves to wait at Golgotha, the place of the skull, and watch the horror unfold before us, if we don't stand by as Joseph of Arimathea takes the body down and lays it in a borrowed tomb, then Easter's meaningless. It's just another day when the family comes over and we put on our best clothing and we eat a lot of ham and scalloped potatoes and we pick up plastic eggs full of delicious treats. The true power of Easter is completely lost if we don't experience Holy Week. But if we do force ourselves to experience it, Easter becomes so much more. Easter is truly life-changing under those circumstances. But only if we watch Jesus lay down his life can we truly appreciate the empty tomb. The stone rolled away and Jesus not dead. Don't ignore it this week. Live it. Experience all that it has to offer. And stand victorious at the mouth of the tomb on Easter morning. Now, you have some ways to do that this week. Wednesday night, we have our 30-minute Lenten service. We will be serving communion. Steve Warnes, one of our lay speakers, will be preaching. 7:30. Thursday, we'll have an hour-long service. It's going to be the Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday service. We'll also have communion there. We'll take more time to walk through the events of the week. But I would encourage you to set aside at least one of those nights, if not both of them, to come and experience Holy Week. So that next Sunday we can stand together and say, Christ is risen indeed.